where we had like the speakers parties or the rows up in set, but yeah, so 5 years Bitcoin Saigon. David just gave me the number like 5 years ago. The Bitcoin price at $300, still trending down towards $159. But yeah, also 5 years of history running this community here in Saigon. We have guests coming from all over Asia. We have guests from Japan, from Hong Kong, from Korea, based out of Thailand, based out of China. So like basically all the early Bitcoin community guys from across Asia are joining us here today to share a bit like their views, how the communities developed over the past 5 years, how Bitcoin itself developed over the past 5 years. We will have a lot of more fundamental talks across the day about like scaling, about privacy, about user interface design. So a lot of things like, okay, where's Bitcoin headed here in the next 5 years? And I think the day will then finalize with Tizen, which has a talk which is probably more for the local taste regarding, okay, how do I invest and make money of this? But that's not like the main focus of this conference here. So Bitcoin Saigon itself, created 5 years ago by like 3 people. I was one of them, as a meetup place for people to talk and meet about Bitcoin. Back then, we didn't have anything like this here in Vietnam yet. So if you wanted to meet people actually in real life to just talk about it, didn't exist. Nowadays, since like 2016, we really run like weekly events. Most of the time, just in some bar, restaurant, but like also once a month, we have some speakers here talking about different topics. We had also some of the bigger names here, maybe like Antonopoulos was one of the biggest, most well-known names, but also quite a few other interesting talks, like Eric Woska was here, who is like the Libitcoin lead developer, also very interesting thoughts. And yeah, I mean, quite a few people have come through over the last couple of years. We hope that we have more people coming through over the next 5 years, providing the content for the community here. Last but not least, also want to thank then our sponsors who helped to make this happen, this event today. I mean, Bitcoin VN, that's kind of my company, also chipped something in. We had some private donors out of the community. We have the guys from Neutron Pay who helped just like a few months ago to conduct the first ever Lightning transaction for real world goods. David Watson here in the audience was the guy who bought his pizza with Lightning, was like writing a little history in the Vietnam Bitcoin history. So yeah, the Neutron Pay guys, Albert will still the only merchant. I mean, we have also a few other people here in the audience who are Bitcoin history in Vietnam. We have also Hip here, who was like the first like more private merchant, renting out her Airbnb place since 2015 for Bitcoin. Started, I think, like January 15, so a good time. Jess, you could buy a few more apartments since then from the revenues you got from this. Not talking too much longer, starting to hand over to like the very first panel. The very first panel will be about like, we have the community founders, leaders from like Hong Kong, from Korea, Beijing, myself here for Saigon, and Tomo, who has been also around since 5 years. He has been at the very first Bitcoin Saigon meetup 5 years ago as well. He's going to be our moderator for this panel. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the day. And yeah, let's get started.
Welcome everyone. So first panel of the day will be pretty light, I think, just talking about our various communities and the various countries around Asia. So I guess first we'll just go through with like a quick introduction, like your name, maybe where you come from, where you're based, and where you started your communities.
Okay, so I'm Richard Bensberg. I live in Beijing, where I run the Beijing Bitcoin Meetup. That's been going since 2014 as well, I think, so probably similar time frame. Right now I work for Blockstream, and here to give a talk and talk about the community as well.
Yeah, I'm Dominik. You probably know me already if you're here in Saigon, running like the local community in Saigon to some degree. Also before that in Frankfurt, one of the co-founders of the local community there.
decided then in 2014 to move to Vietnam, since like Germany was just not very friendly towards Bitcoin, which is still the case, and thought like, okay, we also should have a community here, which was one of the incentives to band together with a few people and starting up this whole thing here.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Leo. I started organizing Bitcoin meetups in Hong Kong in 2012, and that started from just meeting on the rooftop of a mall to ever more elaborate and sophisticated events. Today, the community calls itself the Bitcoin Association of Hong Kong, and I think it's a relatively lively and diverse group of people and businesses and interests that somehow clash in interesting ways, but always find a way to hang out together.
My name is John. I'm from Bitcoin Center Korea. We're almost approaching our 15-year anniversary also. We started March 2015. So we're also a small community based in Korea.
All right, thanks. So maybe we'll jump into, so 5 years ago, everyone's been around about 5+ years. Back then, what were you thinking about Bitcoin, and why was it that so interesting that you wanted to do something related to creating like a community around Bitcoin? John, maybe you can go first.
Well, to me personally, I was searching for something innovative, but at the same time as disruptive as possible, and nothing was more disruptive than Bitcoin. And the fact that it's driven by open source, which depends on community-driven development. Having a community, especially offline community, seemed like a logical way to go.
But as far as finding something disruptive, like where were you coming from? That
I come from
Bitcoin
traditional finance and IT. I was working for financial database company. Yeah.
Leo.
And for us, the need to have Bitcoin meetups is very much around the need to have questions answered, that we didn't really understand anything about Bitcoin, and probably none of us who organized or attended events back then really had like a strong passion for it, or really had was already committed to it. Like few of us had Bitcoin, few of us had like turned on their computer to mine, even less of us had like even used an exchange. So it's very much this uncertainty and curiosity that led me and led others to get excuses to talk to each other about this. And mainly we realized that nobody there could really answer our questions, so we can only take our list of questions back home with us and meet a month later and maybe have some answers through self-study. And that's then how these people develop their passion. If you look at the events of 2012, 2013, Meetup.com had this feature where anybody could just propose an event, and you didn't have to be an organizer to announce it, but you could just get 3 of your friends to join. It would automatically get announced, and a lot of people were using that feature as they were going through Hong Kong to travel elsewhere, or maybe they still had like maybe they still had a job in finance, but on Saturday nights they wanted to talk about this thing called Bitcoin.
Is that when you would have the events, on Saturday nights or during
it was
the week?
In the first 2 years until end of 2014, it was very chaotic. So there would be almost no regular schedule. There would be lots of different organizers. The once a month meetup with a fixed place that only really started like end of 2014, early 2015. And that's then also when we started having our lecture series. So we found an event partner, a co-working space that could give us their space on like every 4 weeks or every 6 weeks, where we could then invite panels like this or speakers.
So, but by that point, you guys were experts on Bitcoin?
No, it still took us a while. I think big turning points for us to realize how little we know about Bitcoin were end of 2015. That was the first large event we organized, Scaling Bitcoin. So having that come to Hong Kong was like a big honor. And we offered to host, and we realized like we have a lot of catching up to do on how we perceive this thing or how we understand it.
You'll never be expert in Bitcoin. It's ever evolving, yeah.
Hopefully, after today, we'll all be a little bit more of an expert. Dominik, so back then, 5 years ago, in Vietnam, what was your perspective on Bitcoin, and what were you trying to bring to Vietnam or Saigon when it came to creating this community?
I mean, basically, as like a 2-time community co-founder, like in Frankfurt back then, really the incentive was like, just find some people who you can talk to about this in real life, because this was like early 2013. Nobody like your family or real life circles ever really has heard about Bitcoin or knew anything about it. So you had to go to like very old school to Bitcoin talk and just like open the thread and like, is there anybody in around Frankfurt who might want to meet up and just talk about this stuff? So that's how in Frankfurt the community started in 2013, which is also still going. They still have like monthly meetups. Vietnam was a bit different scene than like started a meetup like 1.5 years roughly after the one in Frankfurt launched. I moved to Vietnam in early 2014. We had already started also our business here. But the point was that in Vietnam, the topic of Bitcoin was still treated very like suspicious, as everybody tried to keep it very, very low key. And there was just no public space really you could talk about. So after a few months, then like, hey, I mean, we should also create some kind of meeting place where just people interested in the topic can meet with other people talking about it. And when we did this or started out to do so, I mean, back then this was like 3 people leading these efforts. It was myself, it was like Koa, one local student who not much involved anymore since he has now a full-time job, very busy. And Diana Ngo, who was also, or still is, writer, crypto, I think back then Cointelegraph and so on. So she also was involved, now also not much involved anymore since she married, got a kid and so on. But yeah, back then was like us 3 people basically saying, hey, let's also try to organize something here. But we really had a hard time to find a location willing to host us. So when we were approaching some locations, they turned us down because just like, oh, Bitcoin, that sounds kind of dangerous and we don't want to get raided by the police and nah, better don't do it. And luckily after 2 months then we got the guys from Officiance where we hosted our first meetup. It's like a French-Vietnamese co-working space, outsourcing company, yeah, something like this. So they finally had the balls and say, yeah, let's just do it here, which we then also did. Very first meetup, you were also there. We had like 50 people, I think. Turnout was actually quite good. I think we also had somebody from the government there in the last row looking if we start some revolution or something. So we're asking a few weird questions to some people in the back. But since they seem to determine that, yeah, we are not somehow trying to overturn the government here, at least in the short term, yeah, that they left us more or less alone. So I mean, it was a good turnout there, which we had at the first meetup, and since then, I mean, ever going on since.
Richard, how long have you been in Beijing? And anyways, back when you were creating the community there, what was the feeling around Bitcoin in China?
Yeah, so I guess I've been in China. I've been in Beijing since 2001, so a while. But started working in Bitcoin in 2014 at OKCoin in China. So at the time we were a big company, like 100 plus people, and you had like Quoine next door to us, who were also 100 plus people. But within these kind of big companies, there wasn't very many kind of people who like really kind of liked Bitcoin a lot. There was a lot of kind of graphic designers who, oh, okay, I'll do a graphic with the Bitcoin logo on it or whatever, and a lot of kind of coders, but they weren't really kind of interacting with the kind of core protocol at all, and they were simply sort of treating the jobs within the Bitcoin space as just another kind of job. So we wanted to kind of create to actually find out who was the real kind of Bitcoiners within these kind of massive companies, because the companies existed, the kind of community existed, the people were buying the stuff, but we didn't actually know who the kind of real Bitcoiners were. So a kind of small group of us within the company just decided to sort of set up an event and find some other Bitcoiners to talk about Bitcoin. But as it's kind of evolved, I think most important thing for me has just been kind of being able to kind of be there to like meet new people as they're coming kind of through Beijing. So a lot of people coming through, they don't necessarily kind of have a way to kind of interact with the kind of community, especially if they're coming from overseas. So it's been kind of good to sort of have us there to, like, when they're coming through, put on a talk for them, and then at one sort of place they can sort of meet as many kind of Bitcoiners as it is possible to meet in town.
All right. So I guess next thing is why do people go to these meetups and events? Why do we have this conference today? And like why is there a community at all? I mean, there's no like gold meetups or US dollar meetups. Why is there a Bitcoin meetup in each of your cities? And why do the people go there? Like, I guess some people are coming from out of town, just like today there's a lot of people coming to our like event from out of town, but you know, it's also for people that live there. Why do the people go to the meetups, and why should they go?
Should we go down this way? Yeah, so I think really, why is there Bitcoin meetups and there's not gold meetups or something like that? It's a good question. I think partially because there's stuff to build on top of Bitcoin. And so it's a whole kind of ecosystem and technology that you can't just rely on it to be there always. You kind of have to fight for Bitcoin if it's going to succeed. So I think the way that Bitcoin fails is when people stop caring about Bitcoin. So I think there's always got to be that level of kind of protection from the community. I think the other thing as well is, why do you go, is because eventually once you get really into Bitcoin, you lose all of your other friends, and you can't talk to normal people anymore. And so you have to kind of filter in some new people to talk to and to be your friends.
Yeah, I mean, also I think just meeting kind of like-minded people who have kind of similar interests, because like most people out there, they still don't really understand what's going on there, or they just see it as a tool to make some quick money or lose a lot of money quick. Yeah, but I also was, for example, just when I was traveling around, looking always like for, okay, can I meet some Bitcoiners there? I was like at least from what I know, very first Bitcoin meetup in Baku, met some local people there. I was in Cyprus meeting with some Bitcoin people. I was in Israel, which has very strong community. So, I mean, if you go to Israel, very recommended to reach out there, go to the Bitcoin embassy. I think that's one of the most impressive communities I've seen so far. I mean, basically, whenever I travel somewhere, I also try to meet with like the local people, see what's going on there, how do they think about it. Yeah, and I mean, as Richard said, I mean, it's kind of, yeah, you need to be having these people who care about it, otherwise kind of the project dies. But if you look more from like the personal motivation, I think it's really just, you have like kind of friends all over the world, if they're also kind of interested like in this kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, people were surprised. I'm just going to some random countries and people there, yeah, okay, also a Bitcoiner, and let me stay and sleep at their places and so on. I mean, you are really part of like this global community, so to say.
Do you think the community is the same today as it was 5 years ago?
I mean, obviously a lot of things have changed, but I also would say that like really the hardcore of the community, it's still somewhat there. I mean, of course you had like 2017, huge inflow of like a lot of new people in the space, but like the people who are actually really taking things in their hand and running these communities and so on, I think still a lot of this original spirit is there. Yes.
So Leo, again, like why do people go to the meetups in Hong Kong?
So there was in the early days very much this like sense of belonging, especially when the community is still much more intersected with like politics or philosophical beliefs, and Bitcoin would draw very much from like that libertarian crowd. I think today, one of the bigger reasons that keep the Bitcoin community going and keep the Bitcoin community like so creative and interesting is that Bitcoin really is a project that you can actively contribute to, and it's something that you can like be part of. And that's something that a feeling you'll never have in gold or even the internet, not anymore. I think the open source community, or especially Wikipedia community or OpenStreetMaps, they still have that same thing. They still have projects that they can rally around that where they share some kind of common beliefs about transparency, about like scientific research, and where they find this group of people that thinks like them, that acts as like a friend support network, and where people can really have a feeling like I'm part of this project, I'm part of this thing that's bigger than me. Because even if you're not a coder, even if you're designing or writing or organizing events, then you're all contributing to Bitcoin. It's very far from being a pure software product. And it's also very far from like a traditional industry. Sure, people who work in banking might make some friends in their company or some friends in competitors' companies, but the Bitcoin community has produced like hundreds and thousands of very strong friendships of people who would have never met if it wasn't for Bitcoin. And the fact that this had happened often just means that it keeps on going. And maybe times like 2019, where we're more in like a price consolidation and a lot of hype and buzz is disappearing, actually keep that going. Because I've made new friends this year. I don't think I made any friends in 2017.
So John, why? So in Korea, why do people go to your center and the meetups? And is it the same reason?
First, I didn't lose any friends. I had no friend anyway.
Do you have more friends now that you have
Of course,
the center?
yeah. I ended up with more friends. Well, I agree. Yes, it's very similar to everyone else mentioned, but yeah, to us also, you know, when you start getting interested in something and when you start going to some events, you tend to run into gatekeepers, right? And you cannot run some kind of roadblock. But you know, open source community like Bitcoin community tend to be gateways, right? It can lead you to something greater and something better, right? So that's what we try to focus, and I think that's still the main reason why people come. They want to, go somewhere, learn more, but whereas other industries, you have to go through some kind of break that gatekeeper, but our community offers gateway
Like
to
an
other
open.
things. Yeah.
So one thing I haven't heard from you guys is anything about price or speculation drawing people into the communities or meetups. Because one thing I've noticed here in Saigon is that sometimes the price is moving a lot. That tends to also make people come to the meetups more. Is that a factor at all?
In the beginning, yeah, it was a big factor, but it was not my intention. Something that happens accidentally. But over time, after a few cycles, especially Koreans, where information spreads very quickly, people tend to get it, and they get used to it, right? So the first couple of times they come in with all these questions. Okay, what's driving this? What's behind this? But then they tend to, do their own analysis, and they gain more confidence. So they come to share what they think, but it's not like they're frenzied about it's not panic mode anymore. Everything's very calm, and they're more approaching things in confident, analytical way.
But they keep coming back.
Yeah, but not just for that reason. Yeah, price movement is not the main driver anymore. I don't think so. We do mainly English because we're in a location called Itaewon in Seoul. It's a very much expat-driven community, and there are other Korean speaking communities, and we're probably the only place where we do main English. So our target is to, again, like, we try to be gateway between someone from outside of Korea and Korea. So English is probably the easiest language to bridge the gap.
We've had very little success with Cantonese-speaking events. We have held Cantonese-speaking events. We've held workshops in Cantonese. I think especially the workshops that are trying to be very educational, there was some traction. There were people who felt more comfortable learning something complicated new when it's in their mother tongue. But for the majority of our events, for the majority of our Cantonese-speaking events, there was not. There was. We just ended up with like a subset of our usual people rather than new people. For the casual like beer meetups, there are regional differences within Hong Kong, and especially our Kowloon meetup often has like a Cantonese-speaking table. But yeah, that we also haven't been able to hold that in a few months now because the venue closed. The venues that accept Bitcoin, you never know how long.
Okay, so in Beijing, we try to basically do both. So normally, if we'll have a speaker, we'll try to have one English talk and one Chinese talk, depending on the situation. Sometimes we go all English, sometimes we go all Chinese. And obviously, we try to get the slides for the things translated into the other language. So obviously one of the problems that you have is that you have certain groups of people who maybe the Chinese isn't good enough to follow along to the Chinese presentation. And you've got other people whose English is not good enough to follow along to the English presentation. So in order to try to keep that engagement and avoid sort of splitting off into groups and then like talking over the other presentation, which then just gets a little bit kind of into sort of disaster for a meetup. Then we try to sort of have those presentations at least in the language, so you can kind of follow along even if you're not understanding everything. And you try to at least be respectful for the speakers and sit there patiently until we have the sort of networking sort of session at the end of the meetups normally. So people will get the chance to kind of discuss, and so if they didn't understand something, then they can talk to somebody and kind of learn about it kind of towards the end. We've also had one event where we had some Bitcoin Core contributors come to Beijing, and they wanted to talk to the community at large. So we had simultaneous translation for that. And that worked really well, but that's obviously a bit expensive, so we wouldn't do that unless we had a sort of special event with some more sponsorship.
One more follow-on for Jon and Leonard. So your venues, can people attend Bitcoin?
Well, we're non-commercial mainly. Oh, sure. The question was our space. We actually have a physical space. It's a very small office, maybe 1/3, half the size of this space, and it's non-commercial. We try to do non-commercial, non-profit things. So we're not a merchant, but if people want to donate some Bitcoin for coffee, but everything changed with the price movement. Of course, everything people tend not to spend, especially when the fees are high. So I guess that's why we're addressing things like Lightning Network to address this kind of issue. But people a few years ago, people loved that experience. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, and we also had a ATM machine back then. Yeah, it's not working anymore, but people loved that. Getting that hands-on experience was kind of an eye-opener, for many people. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think for about 3 years now, both of our regular venues do accept Bitcoin as payments, and it started with an arrangement where they would only accept Bitcoin during our events, and often I would buy them back from the venue. But then eventually they no longer wanted to sell me the Bitcoins back, and then they accepted Bitcoin during the week too. So that actually worked quite well. So now we also, currently we have one stable venue, and they also accept Lightning. They also accept Ethereum. That's actually really fun to show off, and they accept it anytime. Really, their staff might not always be 100% trained, but then you as the customer are the one who trains the staff.
just to add short to the language, even if you said you don't want to hear me about it, but we also had a few events actually in Vietnamese, but it depends, of course, having speakers who can speak Vietnamese, like Tyson has done some like multi-language basically, or we also had some guys from the community a bit more technical talks. But like if we have guests coming to town, I mean, normally they can't speak Vietnamese, so we are kind of forced to use English then. And also like in Frankfurt, for example, my home community, we have most of the time English because it's just more accessible, and Frankfurt also very international town. But I mean, if there are good people around who can speak Vietnamese, we are very happy also to do more like local content, because we see there's definitely a different kind of audience, like a lot of local people who might not be able to follow like all these advanced talks in English. But yeah, it just depends that we get the speakers with the knowledge. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess moving on. After organizing your communities for the past few years, like, have you seen, besides more people knowing about Bitcoin or knowing more about Bitcoin, like, have you seen actual impact in your local community, or maybe outside of your community, but in the Bitcoin community? Have you seen results, things change because of what you've been doing?
I don't know in terms of Bitcoin, but I think we as a community have certainly helped people to avoid a number of scams. So especially during the kind of ICO craze, people were coming along to meetups. So like people were saying, like, what brings people to meetups? Again, so the people that will come along, yes, price is one reason. A new token that they want to shill to you is another reason. Or I've invested all of my life savings in some Ponzi scheme, and can you tell me about what I've put my money into is another reason. Now, the reason I didn't mention those before is because these people come to one event and then they go home and they don't ever come again. But at least once they've come, then we've helped to kind of educate them that this is not what Bitcoin is about. This is Bitcoin. This is why we do it. We've done like things on like Austrian economics and talks about the technology and things like that, and we don't ever sort of get into those things. So I think in terms of like helping the community, that's one thing. I think also like when people are coming, like when Bitcoin, like when the core developers came to Beijing, I think that was useful for them to get a sense of the kind of community in general, and to get the community to meet them and realize that they're not necessarily all evil people, and just because Jihan has told them they are. So yeah, I think there's been some help, but whether or not we've kind of, I don't think we've necessarily spurred on Bitcoin growth in China, because I think that's mainly a kind of function of price rather than our kind of more technical kind of meetup.
Yeah, right. So Dominik, I mean, we've hosted people from the Ministry of Justice and so on, but have you seen any results, any impacts on Vietnam or policy or the community?
I mean, I think the event which we did like 3 years ago, the Blockfin Asia, definitely had some impact to a degree, because like before it was, I mean, you remember when we organized Blockfin Asia 3 years ago, and it was like, oh, you can't talk about Bitcoin at all. So we had to scrap basically the word Bitcoin from all the homepage and marketing materials. Just, okay, blockchain everywhere. But then when the event happened and like the guy from the State Bank got his physical Bitcoin, was smiling about it, you saw then that after the event, people were much more relaxed about it. I mean, still when you talk to the official guys and you mention Bitcoin, I mean, they sometimes have like the face like they just bite on a lemon or something. But it definitely has opened up since then. I wouldn't just credit only us with this conference, but it contributed, I would say, in what we have been doing here. Otherwise, like on a society-wide scale, I'm not sure if there's that much of an impact like by the communities. I think like if we just look like at the global Bitcoin movement, I also wouldn't say that like one single community has like a big impact there. It's more like just like kind of network of independent nodes who contribute to like this whole thing, which is like the global Bitcoin community. And more so on an individual level. Just you go to these meetups, you meet people, maybe you make some friendships or even business relationships. So on an individual level, definitely there has been quite a lot of impact then for the people attending and yeah, forging these relationships there.
Leo, have you seen any impact on Hong Kong?
I think the government still mainly ignores us, but it does happen more and more that they're, yeah, trying to make sure we're somewhat on the periphery, you know, not necessarily that they would invite us and ask for advice, but they make sure we always get a round of free tickets to whatever networking events or conferences the government hosts, just to make sure there's some Bitcoiners in the crowd who yell loudly if something goes wrong. That's at least my impression. As far as the events or talks or conferences go, I am quite confident that people find them useful in one or the other way. Some of them maybe more on the educational side, and some more on the networking side. People definitely talk about business, and they do make connections there, just in a way that probably would be a little bit more difficult if you had to do your own research of who the local players are and then cold call them and set up meetings. Walking into the Bitcoin meetup is a lot easier. But yeah, some people also just come there to vent or to hang out with friends.
Hong Kong is experiencing a bit of unrest for the last month, right? So you touched on the government's view on it and their actions towards it, but what about actual people who seem to be in conflict with government? Do you see any adoption happening there in that regard?
So the main thing I see changing is that explaining Bitcoin to people becomes a lot easier. It becomes almost, you no longer need to explain why it would be valuable for the government being unable to seize your funds. It becomes very obvious suddenly that, yes, you might need to raise funds anonymously, or you might need to make purchases anonymously. If you buy 100 gas masks on Amazon, that might be enough to convict you for aiding for rioting, for example. Buying those with Bitcoin is then it's very obvious when we explain it, but at the same time, it doesn't solve people's immediate problems, and so we don't see any adoption happening there. People's problems might be on, how not to be arrested by police, or how to then get 100 gas masks through customs, because nowadays they do check. And then sure, you can have them delivered to a fake name in a real building and pay with Bitcoin, but the problem that is still unsolved is how to get these things through customs. And there's a lot of little things like that where I think Hong Kong, as being a relatively rich place, money itself is not so much of an issue. People aren't worried about how to pay for the gas mask, and then Bitcoin also is not very much adopted. There's one very popular tool called Hong Kong Map Life. It's just a map that shows you the presence of police and where tear gas is being fired and where roadblocks are. People use that to avoid arrest, but people also use that to avoid protests, right? If you hate the protesters and you very much support the government, you might still want to use that tool because you don't want to end up exiting a subway station and then having chemicals thrown at you. And they exclusively fund themselves through cryptocurrencies, and they've been quite they've shown that it's a website and an app. Was removed by Apple from the App Store, but it's still in the Play Store. It works in the browser still. They exclusively fund themselves with cryptocurrencies, mainly Bitcoin. There is Hong Kong Free Press, which has seen, generally an uptick of donations that they've been able to use to hire more freelance photographers or journalists, and a lot of that also comes through Bitcoin. Hong Kong Map Life, hkmap.life, I believe. Yeah, Live.
All right, back.
Just a quick one more note.
Sure.
I opened some channels to, I'm not sure if it was Free Press, but some other institution accepting donations, and I'm actually seeing quite a lot of movement.
Okay. Yeah. Cool.
John, so back to Korea. After, I mean, your center hosts a lot of people coming from outside of Korea, and it's
Yes.
English language. So, what kind of results have you seen after doing this for 5 years now?
Well, I mean, I cannot take all the credits myself, but as a community, I think we have been making small impacts throughout that adds up to greater impact. You know, in Korea, when you watch even network TV, whenever they mention Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, before they have to have a little caption or someone for 30 seconds explain what it is, but now they just assume that everybody knows. If they have to explain it, the network seem kind of behind and stupid, right? And also, like, we also had similar cases where Richard mentioned, in the beginning, I remember a few occasions where, some elderly ladies came in after getting scammed by some Ponzi scheme, but then they, attend some workshops, they learn about Bitcoin and actually start trading themselves, and they come back 6 months later and, yeah, why did I need those people? Like, this is great, and I don't need any dependency. And wow, then they realize, start questioning other things. Okay, well, why do I need to rely on this for this purpose? This other things, and that kind of, like, I call these catalyst events, like this kind of alignment that leads people to think, why do I do this, and why do I have to rely on that person? Why do I have to trust that? That kind of impact, even those very small, little by little, I think that adds to very meaningful conversation in the society. Yeah. So to me, that was meaningful. Yeah.
So I guess for the next couple of years,
Yeah.
I guess you guys will all be helping more and more people to
As
not
much
get
as we
scammed
can,
as
yeah.
much. But is there anything else that you kind of think will happen in the next 5 years? Like your community there,
Mhm.
how do you think it'll grow and develop over the next 5 years? And will it be the same, or do you think you'll go in a different direction?
I think it will just be a continuation of, we try to be low key and very, very open to many other gateways. So we try to, let the community decide what they want to do and let them do what they want to do. So, we don't see a big thing happening, but it's a gradual movement. But I think Bitcoin, past 5 years, if it was incubating, a beta testing phase, I think next 5 years it's going to be, real world application phase. So we're going to see, more applications happening.
So we do have to wrap up, but I think maybe this will be that last question for each of you to just kind of talk about what you expect over the next 5 years.
For us, we've made it an important point that the face of the community should no longer be a single individual. I think it's a bit of a problem when people start to associate a community with an individual, or an individual with the community. And so getting more people involved in organizing events and kind of claiming that community for them as well a bit is quite important. We're seeing in Hong Kong already that it also brings, that new energy also brings different directions. I think for the next few years in Hong Kong, you can expect maybe a bit more diversity in events and not just Bitcoin and Lightning. Also in regards to the kind of events, the kind of audiences, and just keeping a bit of that experimentation going that, yeah, older members of the community might have lost.
Dominik, how would you like to see the Bitcoin Saigon community change or develop for the next 5 years?
I mean, I guess we kind of also keep going, but things, of course, are evolving. So a bit like same, but different. So if I look, for example, at the Frankfurt community, I mean, I'm also happy that this keeps going without me being there. I mean, we have a few other people there involved in the community organization. We also have here locally, maybe like, I don't know, half a dozen people who kind of help out with the organization. Same like Leo. I hope, of course, that there's more people. So, I mean, if you feel that you have some free time, want to do a bit more, We are always open for people who want to help out, organizing things, taking things into their own hands, because ultimately, like, these communities are what everybody makes out of it. So, yeah, I mean, if you want to lend a helping hand and also contribute, we are always open for people who want to participate.
Richard, you get the last word.
So last words. So I think for me, if Bitcoin really succeeds over the next 5 years, then I expect our meetup to be completely banned and not be able to do it anymore. And that would be a success. So we will have already won. But if that doesn't happen, then I think we continue as we are until the ban comes in.
All right, thanks everyone. I think we'll finish there.
Cheers.
Okay, starting with our first solo talk today, Koji, who also has been visiting us in Vietnam now 1 or 2 times in the past already over the last couple of years, has been writing, I think, the most famous Japanese blog on Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, focuses right now on like data and like data visualization and analysis in the Bitcoin space. He will be talking today about why is it important to get some data literacy to understand what's going on actually in the space, especially here in Asia, where a lot of projects, exchanges like to pump up their numbers with a bit unrealistic numbers. Koji will tell you basically how to spot this out and why it matters for you as investor trader.
Thanks, Dominik, for the introduction. I'm going to talk about data and media literacy in the crypto industry today. So today's agenda is why it matters. I think it's not a secret that a lot of data in the crypto industry is fake and media is not really reliable. But why should you care is one. And also, I'm going to look into mainly 2 types of data, off-chain data and on-chain data, how we can use them and what are the issues of both of them and how we can mitigate them. But to simply put, okay, sorry. So I have to do it myself. Okay, so today's agenda. It looks a little bit boring, but maybe a simpler question is, how can we spot shitcoins? How can we tell shitcoins from legit ones? And, you know, we all love shitcoin and scams, right? We all love to talk about them. So I'm going to look into some data and metrics and how we can just tell which one's a decent project and which ones are not, and that kind of stuff. So most of people here don't know me. Actually, I know a lot of people here already, but I've been in the space since 2014, mostly active in Japan and worked on various projects in the past, but probably mostly known as media or content guy outside Japan. But I've been involved in wallet development and other stuff as well. Recently, I'm more interested in market research strategies and that kind of stuff. And I'm going to share some of the findings I'm recently focusing on today. So, oh, sorry, I keep forgetting. Okay, so this was a self-introduction slide. And okay, so I found this photo. This was when I visited Bitcoin Saigon in January 2016. So it's about 4 years ago. And I looked at this picture and I was like, oh, like I was skinnier. So 4 years actually is a long time. So this is a really good photo. Yeah, I cannot believe this was already 4 years ago, but yeah. So this is 5 years anniversary, so good job, long time. So going to the main topic. So why it matters. So there are different types of people here, traders, investors, developers, and business people, and probably there's no policymakers here today, but different types of people. But my point is it matters to all of those people in different ways to make better and more effective decisions. So understanding data better is a very, very important topic, in my opinion. So it's not just for traders and investors, but I see a lot of businesses make bad decisions based on bad information, inaccurate data, and media FUD. So this is more than that, more than just traders' concern. So the first type of data I'm going to introduce is off-chain market data. And some of the most common off-chain metrics are trading volume ranking. I'm sure everybody has looked CoinMarketCap and their coin rankings. I do that as well. And also most traded national currencies for Bitcoin by CoinHills. But this is less popular, but have you guys ever heard of it? CoinHills? Yeah? Familiar with this? Seen it? I used to use it in back in 2017 because there's no other good resources to track which currency is more popular against Bitcoin. And Bitcoin dominance chart, of course, this is also very, very popular. So you've seen this before, exchange, trade volume ranking, this BKEX or whatever that nobody's never heard of is on top. I'm going to talk about it. And CoinHills, and this is the current data. So it says USD has 76% market share, etc. But it has issues as well. I'm going to explain. And also this, everybody checks this. Everybody, uses this and see Bitcoin's market dominance is, I don't know. Right now it's 70%, I believe. So everybody uses this chart. Okay, but common issues of off-chain data is data provided by exchange is very inaccurate. And there's a lot of fake volume, which I'm going to address in depth later. And data is often outdated. So CoinHills, for example, they basically aggregate all the data from exchanges, but I checked many of their content, and a list of exchanges are already outdated. But media still uses this and say hey, Korean won still has 2.5% of market share for trading, etc. So, but not really. So you have to be very careful about is the data really not outdated or not. And also comparisons are not apple to apple very often. So for example, CoinHills again, this actually mixes up derivatives trading volume and spot trading volume. So for example, Korean won, there's no crypto derivatives in Korea, right? But they still have strong spot trading market. But looking at this, it just looks like Korea's only have 2.5%. But definition is also very important here. And popular metrics such as dominance chart, it's actually not very helpful sometimes. It's more misleading in my opinion. So one of the biggest issues here is market cap ranking or dominance doesn't take liquidity or trading volume into consideration. So this actually favors altcoins, aka shitcoins, more. So out of those issues, I think this fake trading volume is one of the fundamental issues, and that I'm interested in as well. And this is also, everybody kind of knows this already, so I'm not going to explain too much. But my point here is fake trading volume is harming the entire industry, not just some uninformed investors, but like I said, some projects and businesses decide to work on certain projects based on inaccurate data or fake trading volume, or Bitcoin ETF is constantly rejected because of market manipulation and fake data. So it has a lot of implications. So mitigations, there are different ways to spot and mitigate the fake volume. One is web traffic analysis. So if certain exchange has a lot of legit volume, it should have a lot of traffic, web traffic, right? So that's one. And also order book analysis. If order book depth is very shallow and spread is wide, then it must mean they're faking the volume, or you cannot really trade at the price that they're showing. And on-chain analysis, which I'm going to talk later as well, is one of more interesting ones. So you can look at exchanges, cold storage reserve, hot wallet, also how many coins are going in and out of exchanges. So it kind of gives you an idea how popular or how used the exchanges are. And also, if regulation gets more strict, then a lot of the public data should be more or less reliable, but it has some drawbacks as well. Okay. By the way, if you have any questions, you can ask me during the presentation as well. But I'll have some time for questions later. So using those metrics, especially CoinGecko's order book analysis, known as trust score, I myself filtered out dubious trading pairs and tried to create a real trading volume ranking myself. But note some of the important market data, such as OTC market in China or even in Vietnam, is not known, so I cannot really take those into consideration. But I try my best to create a better ranking and what the reality looks like. So this is CoinGecko's trust score marketing trading pair ticker. So if it's yellow, it means their order book is a little bit dubious. So there's a good chance that they are faking the volume. Green is good. So from this, for example, I deduce Bitham's Bitcoin to Korean won trading volume is not faked. So it's kind of simple and it has some limitations, but I think it should work better than just believing what they give you. So, and this is the ranking that I got. This is a new ranking. This is the ranking from yesterday. So according to this, China via USDT has close to 50% of the trading volume, USD second, and Korean won 12%, and Japan about 7%, etc. And actually, original motivation for me to doing this is because trading volume for Japanese yen was kind of inflated, but I had a feeling Korea is probably ahead of Japan now, considering talking with some people in Korea and considering what's happening in Japan, where they're trying to lower the leverage rate, derivatives leverage rate to right now 4 times, now to two. So everybody's probably going to like BitMEX and other exchanges now, but so it kind of shows, I was kind of right, Japan probably has much less market share than CoinHills tells us. And countries like Korea has better market share here. So, wait. All right. Which one? Exchange volume for 24 hours. Yeah. This one. This is local Bitcoin's volume, but I'll explain in the next slide. Yeah. 4. Number 4. This one? 6 row. This. Turkey. Oh yeah. So it depends on the day, right? So I use CoinGecko's metrics. So for example, this is Turkey or Poland, I'm not sure. So countries like in China, US, or Japan, for example, they have a lot of exchanges, several exchanges, right? So even if one exchange fakes volume, the other exchange's volume just comes up. But for example, countries like Turkey, I only track 1 or 2 legitimate exchanges. So if one exchange starts faking volume according to CoinGecko's trust score, then the volume becomes really, really small. So that's also a limitation. So, but it depends. I think Turkey, on some days, Poland, Poland. I think Poland has 1 or 2 legit kind of large exchanges. I forgot which one, but number could vary on different days, different times, different days. So sometimes it's kind of inaccurate, I have to admit, but I think it still works for most part. Okay, it's back. Okay. So key findings, I've already explained CoinHill's data is kind of outdated, and China still dominates crypto trading market. But this is also kind of debatable because I count USDT trading volume as China's, because there's a lot of research and also information that there's a strong association between Tether trading and money from China. So I'd assume that, but this is maybe this is a little bit too much in favor of China, but still. And also countries like Russia and Venezuela don't have large trading volumes on exchanges, but they have very, very strong local Bitcoins volume. So Russia here, there's no Russia in here, but Russia is actually #1 in terms of local Bitcoins volume. Okay. Yes, but this volume is mostly from Binance. So I say Binance. Yeah, they could definitely fake local Bitcoin's volume as well. So it's just one indicator. It could be wrong as well. But from what I understand, there's no good exchanges in Venezuela. So that's like the only way people can trade Bitcoins. But I don't know who's exactly in buying Bitcoins. Maybe it's like some Venezuelan friend says, oh, it should be government officials. So maybe it's not like real people buying Bitcoins. Or I don't know if it's 1 or 2 individuals buying this much or 1,000 people buying Bitcoins. So, good questions, thank you. And recently, Binance announced they're going to enter Russia and Turkey. And looking into those data, it makes a lot of sense because there's no decent, strong exchange in Russia, but still there's a lot of local Bitcoin volume. So it makes sense to me. Also, another interesting finding is that Bitcoin trading volume versus Ether trading volume ratio is about 10 to 12%. So this is just for BTC to fiat versus BTC to Ether. But I also calculated BTC to any crypto versus Ether to any crypto as well. But the ratio is about the same, 10 to 12%. But nominal trading volume says that ratio is about 35%. So I can kind of deduce that fake volume in general favors altcoins and tends to inflate its relevance. And filtering out all those fake volume, I can say that Bitcoin is still by far the king of crypto trading. Okay, so that's... Okay, there you go. Now, I'm going to touch on on-chain data. So off-chain data has a lot of issues, fake volume, etc. But on-chain data seems to have some properties that off-chain data cannot offer. Especially, it's harder to fake on-chain data. Blockchain data, blockchain never forgets. And also, history on blockchain is open and transparent, so anybody can access it and analyze it, basically. You can deduce many things: trading activities, community activities, usage demand. And those are things that, some of the things you can look into when you look into on-chain data. But on-chain data can also lie. Data on blockchain is most part accurate, but interpretations are often not. Also, on-chain data alone doesn't really tell you the whole story, and it sometimes even confuses you. I'll give you some examples. Another thing is blockchain transactions can be easily manipulated, especially on low-fee blockchains such as EOS, Bitcoin Cash, etc., kind of newer blockchains. So I'm going to touch on that as well. Definition of some on-chain metrics are not always consistent. And also some of the newer technologies. I think there's going to be a presentation about Liquid today, but those technologies will make it harder to track the data that's currently available. I think it's good for users' privacy, but for some traders, I talked to some traders and they're like worried, oh, if Tether becomes popular, then, what should I do? Because I'm tracking Tether issuance now, but my strategy won't work anymore. Shit, or something like that. I don't know. Yeah. So this is a very kind of popular table by DApp.com. They compare smart contract platforms in terms of transaction numbers and dApps numbers, etc. According to this, EOS has way more transactions than Ethereum. Even Steam and Tron has more transactions than Ethereum, for example. And then some people claim, oh, EOS is more popular than Ethereum or more used, Tron's better Ethereum, or something like that. But like I said, transaction numbers on low fee chain can be rigged pretty easily. So I don't think it's a very good way to measure measuring usage and demand by transaction numbers, not the best way. And similar incident happened with Bitcoin Cash, I think May this year. There was a lot of transactions happening on Bitcoin Cash at one time, but most of the transactions were actually generated by a single address if you look into on-chain data. So if you look into on-chain data, that's good, but sometimes you see like, oh, there's a lot of Bitcoin Cash transactions, so Bitcoin Cash must be used a lot. But if you look a little bit deeper, you can actually see that, oh, it's just from one single address, so it's not really, right? So you have to be careful about that as well. And I think if you want to measure demand, a slightly better way is to compare aggregated transaction fees, in my opinion, which is in the next slide. So this is a aggregated transaction fee per block, I think, comparing Bitcoin and Ether. So here, Bitcoin has more transaction aggregated transaction fees, but here and I think here, it's about October this year, Ether's aggregated transaction fee was higher than Bitcoin. This was due to use of Tether on Ethereum. And higher fee is not very good for users, but it also kind of shows you that people are still willing to use it even if the fees are higher. So I think it can be a metric to measure demand. Okay, next topic. Do I still have time? Yeah? I'll try to finish it quickly and should be fine. Okay, so this is a node distribution by country, which I like to use and a lot of other people like to use as well. So Bitcoin node count from bitnodes.org by earn.com, and Ethereum node count from Ethernode, Lightning node count from 1ml.com. But this also has issues as well. According to this, there's about 9,000 Bitcoin nodes, 7,000 Ethereum nodes, about 2,500 Lightning nodes, etc. But I'll explain this in the next slide. But definition of full nodes are not always the same. I think most people here know difference Ethereum's full node versus archival node discussion. I don't know, I'm just curious. Do you think it's fair to compare Bitcoin full node and Ethereum full node, non-archival node? Because they sometimes change definitions of full node and you're not even sure if it's a fair comparison. And also, number of Lightning Network node counts inflated. So according to 1mll.com, Lightning node count is at right now 10,000 versus about 9,000 of Bitcoin nodes on BitNode. So something weird is going on. So I looked into it, and obviously they don't really track inactive Lightning nodes. So their node count just keeps going up. So it's inflated. So in this case, it's probably better to count Lightning channel capacity than the node head count. So you have to be careful if the data itself is accurate because it really depends on the definition or how you count them. Also, geographical distribution. So for Ethereum's case, for example, there's about 2,000 Ethereum nodes and 600 in Germany, etc. Seems pretty geographically distributed, but according to ChainStack research, there's about 61% of Ethereum nodes are on cloud. So have to take that into consideration as well. It's frozen again? Okay. Okay, it's frozen, but there you go. Okay. Yeah, I'm almost finished. I wanna leave some time for questions. Okay, so this was an article on Cointelegraph about Lightning Network node count. As I said, it's not really accurate that there's more than 10,000 nodes, Lightning nodes right now, but a lot of media doesn't really look that deep into it. So if some widely used website says, oh, there's 10,000 Lightning nodes now, they'll probably write articles about it. So you have to be careful about stuff like this as well. This happens all the time. So another on-chain metrics, exchange inflows, outflows. I'm sure token analysts, some of people here also use this. I like it as well. So value inflows to exchanges can mean selling pressure, outflows, more buying or saving effect. Also, some people use tether issuance as a buy or bull signal for Bitcoin. But this value transfer can also be kind of artificial and not organic. So for example, there's one incident. There was a lot of value outflows from Poloniex, I believe. And some people said, oh, it's not good or something's going on, but they actually was trying to migrate to a new cold wallet address or something. So you have to monitor on-chain data, but at the same time, you have to understand what's happening outside the blockchain as well to understand the environment accurately. Also, tether issuance in the conspiracy theory, people love this. There's a recent academic research that says tether was issued on a single address. That's the market was manipulated by a single person or something like that. But if you understand how blockchain works, you have to have an address that issues tokens. So it doesn't really mean there's only one person trying to issue that. There could be like tens of thousands of people like asking Tether to issue tokens, and then Tether company issues new Tether tokens from the single address. So have to be careful about stuff like that as well. So looking at on-chain data alone doesn't always help, is the key insight. So conclusion, you should use both off-chain and on-chain data. Lots of off-chain data is inaccurate and faked, and on-chain data can definitely help, but on-chain alone is often not good enough and misleading. So use both to complement each other. And also don't trust data and analysis on crypto media in general, because they are very quick to jump onto conclusions. Like if there's a little bit of spike in local Bitcoin volume in Hong Kong, for example, Bitcoin's popular in Hong Kong because of the political unrest or something like that. So it always happens. It's very weird. Or, China crypto ban fad, or my least favorite one is, Bitcoin's popular in Japan, or regulation's good for Japan, or something like that. Just very popular narratives, but have to look deeper into that. And also experts and insiders also make mistakes. And this happens to me as well. And I see some insiders or so-called experts being kind of clueless outside their own domain. So you have to be careful about that as well. In the future, I think off-chain data will be more accurate, while on-chain data will be more private. So current approach might not work in the future. But by improving crypto data and media literacy, you can make better informed decisions for yourself and help push the industry forward as a whole. So there's some useful resources, but I'll probably share the slide later. By the way, I'm gonna put up some of the tables and charts, historic charts on my own website, bitcoinization.com later. Right now it's very alpha and I don't want to even like talk about it yet, but if you're interested, some of the tables are already up there that spot trading volume by country, for example. Right. Okay, so that's it. If you have any questions, shoot me any questions. Sure.
Have you analyzed the order books to see how often they're faked?
How often?
The order book itself is fake.
It really depends on the exchange or even on the same exchange. For example, Bithumb. Sometimes CoinGecko's analysis says that their Bitcoin to Korean won trading volume is faked, like Monday, but next day it's green. So
how about the order book itself? So like if you actually try to take an order from the order book, it disappears.
Disappears. So to be quite honest, I outsourced that analysis to CoinGecko because I don't want to look into all those myself. So I cannot really say for sure, but pretty sure some exchanges just rig order books itself. So yeah. So it should be not just order book analysis. It should be a combination of web traffic analysis, order book, API, on-chain analysis. So it should be. So CoinGecko should improve their metric as well. But I cannot really do it by myself. So I'm outsourcing it basically. Yeah.
Are there any other sites doing a better job at tracking open channels on the Lightning Network other than 1ml.com?
There's bitcoinvisuals.com or something called, I think. bitcoinvisuals.com. I use that as well.
So I would advise against looking any stats of Lightning Network because most of the stuff there is moving towards being private by default.
Right.
So for example, if you have a mobile wallet, none of it is announced to anybody except your like a peer you have a channel with. So the channel is private, the existence of a node is private.
Right.
And then if you have nodes that are like they have very high liquidities, they often choose to open channels to other high liquidity nodes that are also completely private, although they have a lot of capacity to just route payments through them. So I would say all of these stats are highly unreliable.
Yeah.
And I would expect them to actually start going down soon.
Oh.
For that
Any reason why they're going down?
Because it's private and you don't see that.
Oh.
Right.
Okay.
So everything used to be public by default, and now it's moving towards being private. So the numbers will definitely keep going down.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. In conclusion, I kind of said the same thing basically, but I agree, and I think it's a good thing for users. But for someone like me who want to understand what the hell is happening, maybe it's not good. Yeah. But I think it's better in general. Or something like Liquid. I think you're going to talk about Liquid? Yeah. So you should definitely pay attention to that as well.
Any other questions?
Hey, thanks, Koji. I just want to add something to what he said back there and what Tomo said. I trade a lot, so the order books that he was asking about, yeah, I see it faked all the time. So they'll list something and then you try to go in there and buy 1,000 tokens or 10,000 tokens, and you pretty much just wiped out the entire order book. And I've done that with several exchanges. A lot of Chinese exchanges do that. Don't see that too often on the US exchanges. So sometimes I'll just see something and I just say, you know what, I'm just going to buy out the entire order book and see if it'll fill. And so it might say that it has 10,000 tokens. Now, these are very small tokens. Okay? It's not like I'm going in there buying all up Bitcoin or something. And then I'll put in an order to buy 10,000 like they show, and I might get 500 or 1,000 tokens filled.
Right.
And then on the thing about the nodes, you showed that there's like 9,000 something Bitcoin nodes, or 9 or 10,000 somewhere around there. I forgot the number, but I just want to share with your audience also that number is not like real. The reason why I say that is because I've been to several Bitcoin farms where my friends had several containers of nodes, and it's owned by the same guy.
Right.
So I mean, you go to those Bitcoin farms, and the guy might own 10 containers full of miners in there, and he's setting up nodes in there, but it's owned by one individual.
Right. It
So-
doesn't say the number of individual owning the
Yeah.
nodes though. So yeah, there's that
so
limitation as well.
Yeah,
Definitely.
just want to keep that
Sure.
in mind, guys. That 9,000 nodes out there, but it might be just a handful of people that's owning them.
Definitely.
Because
Yeah.
it takes money to run those containers full of
I
nodes.
agree.
Like I invested in a coin one time to stake it. And I was setting up my own staking nodes. And I was talking to the guys that worked on the project, and they said, yeah, it's very decentralized, all this stuff.
Right.
So I bought some of it. I made money off of it. And then when I went home, one day I just I wonder how many nodes on this network. And I looked, and there was 71 nodes.
Right.
And at first you might say, well, that's pretty decent for a small altcoin.
Right.
But then I realized, wait a minute, me and my friends own a large chunk of those nodes. And we didn't do that on purpose. We set it up to stake, and we found out, wait a minute, I got 3, which one got 4, and 2, wait a minute. We own 1/3 of the nodes. So I was like, oh man, screw this.
Right.
So just be aware.
Yeah,
It's not
exactly.
how many nodes, how many owners are behind those nodes.
Yeah.
That are important.
So exactly, and that's why my suggestion that looking both into on-chain and off-chain data like information such as this. So you cannot really trust. Oh, there's 71 node counts. So there must be about 70 people owning or running it, but actually not, right? So you have to take off-chain information or common knowledge, common sense into account as well. Otherwise, it can trick you. So I definitely agree. So that's why I'm trying to look at many different metrics or talk to different people so that I can have a better understanding of what's going on. So looking into just node count and say it's it's popular in Japan or something like that is not a very good way. I definitely agree. Sure.
Sorry. Have you taken a look at so-called decentralized exchanges, perhaps something like BISC, and are they doing anything different in terms of being transparent about trading volumes as opposed to what centralized exchanges do?
I mean, it should be a little bit more transparent because there's transaction fees. It's a little bit more expensive to fake the data, but it can, for something like EOS, I think there's a DEX on EOS, right? And the transaction numbers are enormous because the fees are low. So it really depends on how expensive it is to fake data. For a lot of off-chain data, it's very cheap. So I think it's a matter of cost, in my opinion. Sure.
So how do you define fake data? There's a lot of people, it seems like fake data is subjective.
Right.
To you, it's fake, might be legitimate to me.
My question is how do you define fake data? There seems to be a lot of one project will accuse the other project of faking data or a spam attack.
Right.
But if somebody is putting their capital on the line to do whatever, is that really fake? And how in your view do you determine that?
So I would say on-chain data is not fake data because it all actually happened. But say fake order books or something that's completely fake. It doesn't really exist. That's fake. But for on-chain transactions, it actually happened, and even if it's cheap, they actually created transactions, etc. So I would consider it real. Fake? Yeah, fake. How do you define fake volume? Yeah, it's kind of subjective. If it's far from the reality, I would call it fake. But so my job, my interest is to figure out whether this data is reliable or not, how much. So the clear definition is kind of blurred. Sure.
So in 2017, Bitcoin miners were actually sending transactions from themselves to themselves,
Right.
paying very high fee. And would you consider that to not be is that fake volume? Is it how would you look at that?
That's miners sending transactions to each other and inflate the fee, for example. Is that fake? I mean, myself personally, I don't really think it's faked because it's kind of difficult to say. But again, it's not cheap. It's not cheap. They still have to pay. Well, for miners, right? For miners, right? It's cheaper. So if it's extremely cheap to do that, maybe you can call it. It's. Yeah, but there's also a risk.
Oh, you don't announce the transaction. You don't announce the transaction. You just include it in the block.
The other thing too is that if somebody wants to pay a fee, right? To me, there's no such thing as a spam transaction or a big transaction.
They're paying it themselves.
So if there's no risk for a fee involved, assume that, then maybe you can call it fee. Yeah, if miners are 100% like without any risk, can just pay themselves and
Need to get the next talk.
Okay, it's probably about cost and risk, but again, hard to say. I'm not really trying to argue what is fake or not. I'm just trying to understand what's happening.
Okay, we need to stop the Q&A now because we start running seriously over time. I mean, very interesting discussion. I mean, Koji is around all day long, so you can ask him more around lunchtime or later on also the after party. Our next speaker, without further much ado, Larry from Hong Kong has been also one of the founders of the Bitcoin Association of Hong Kong, now also one of the founders of New Internet Labs, and he will tell you why it is important that we build apps that can't be evil and how to do so.
Thank you very much. So this is not me. So my name is Larry. I know a lot of you here. I was I think in Saigon in 2017 visiting Dominik and had a great meetup at an Italian restaurant that had a Bitcoin ATM. So I have fond memories of that. And I'm here to talk to you today about apps that can't be evil. And while we're waiting for the slides to come up, I think it's really interesting that the talk that Koji just gave. And one person in the audience mentioned how things are becoming private. And that's sort of like it's amazing how fast humanity got used to like being able to track everything. Like both like companies and people, like it used to be that like people would walk into your store, they'd buy a widget, they'd give you some cash, you'd have no idea who they are. Now we expect to know, like, you know, how did they get there, where did they come from, like where did their money come from, like what other interests do they have, like, you know, what time did they go to bed, and that all sort of came in like the past, I would say like 10 to 15 years of the internet. And since we got used to it now, as we see that disappearing as privacy technologies happen, like lightning channels that are off the grid, you start to wonder, well, like I've gotten used to making like decisions about the world based on all this data, and like what do I do now that I don't have that information? And I don't have a lot of answers to that, but I'm one of the people that's trying to make the information disappear. So yeah, so let's talk about apps that can't be evil. Again, my name is Larry Salibra. I'm the founder of New Internet Labs, a startup based in Hong Kong. It's about a year old. Previously, I was one of the first product engineering hires at Blockstack. And like Leo, I'm a co-founder of the Bitcoin Association of Hong Kong. Got involved back in 2013, 2014. So those of you that know, are familiar with tech, know Google, obviously, and their sort of like phrase they put in their corporate mission was don't be evil. So as they were growing as a company, they wanted to remind people, like, you know, we're building a lot of power here. We don't want to be evil. And at some point they removed that. And they decided, hey, you know, we're not going to say that anymore because we've already become evil. And we don't really want to like remind people of that. So we take a different look at this sort of in the Blockstack project. We think that you should never really have companies or individuals that are like sitting there saying, should we be evil or not? Like that's just a power that people shouldn't really have. And we think that you can use technology to build tools that prevent people from being evil. And I think Bitcoin is a great example of that. And it sort of prevents governments from being evil if we take the power away from them to print money. I really like this quote, this tweet that Nick Sabo put up about trust minimization. And he said, decentralization is only a means toward the key to the blockchain value, which is trust minimization. And it brings a whole bunch of things really like immutability, censorship resistance, monetary and financial sovereignty. I think people get really confused about like all of these things so-called blockchains say they can deliver on. But what you're really like the core value is like minimizing trust, like not your keys, not your Bitcoin. You can validate transactions. So somebody sends your money, you don't have to like trust the bank to tell you whether or not you received it. You can run code that you trust and that can like validate on your behalf. So trust minimization is why we decentralize, and it's really like the main benefit. We don't decentralize to make more money. We don't decentralize to save on fees. It's often more expensive. We don't decentralize because we think it can help us raise more money. Centralization is expensive, and we do it because we want to minimize trust. So like we said, it gives you a bunch of different benefits. And so what I want to talk about today is the current web. So I'm not going to really focus on money, but focus more on the apps that we use on a day-to-day basis. So imagine a world where there's our friend Alice, who often shows up in tech talks, and she's made a transaction and paid Bob $10,000. She uses an accounting software called EvilBooks to keep track of all of her business happenings. So she signs on to her EvilBooks accounting software, and she enters this payment. I paid Bob $10,000. What actually happens though, when she hits like submit, is that like she sends this sort of like volcanic plume of her private data around the internet. She sort of assumes it's going to EvilBooks, but it's going to all these other people. Like she's telling people that run the name system like where she is, what she's looking to access. She's telling information. She's sending information to all of these different providers of libraries and software that the developers of EvilBooks have included into their app. So it's really pretty crazy. I mean, you're looking there at your web browser and you think I've got like evilbooks.com there. I'm dealing with them, but in reality, you actually have all these unseen parties. And when you go and like break it down, there are dozens of them with every website or every click that you make. And so that's sort of like the area that I'm focused on when we talk about apps that can't be evil. How can we take all of this trust that we have in the current web, and how can we minimize it and reduce it, reduce that service area to the point where it's as small as possible? So I think that when users use apps and use the web, they think that like if you ask them like, would I want that last slide I just had, or would I want a world where like I'm using an app and all the data and stuff I put in the app is just mine and no one else knows? I think they would choose the latter. And I think many people, at least in the early days of the web, felt that way. I mean, in fact, I think back to like the 90s when I was in high school, using very early versions of the web, and it felt like it's just me and my computer and my like school or home, and like there's no one else there except the other person I'm talking to. But really, as we've seen in the past couple decades, there are like hundreds of other people in the room. In fact, like most of the world is in the room with you whenever you're on the internet. So what I'm thinking about is how can we get from the previous slide here, how can we get to here? So the solution that we try the way we try to do that today, we being society, is we try to look at like what do users want? And we do that like through a process of determining user intent. And then once you figure out user intent, you can figure out a way to enforce it. And the current sort of approaches to that have been to have a terms of service. So you roll up to your website you want to use, you roll up to Twitter, you want to sign up, you get shown this like 35-page document that says every possible way that this the counterparty you're dealing with could violate your trust. And then you're asked to whether or not you want to agree to it or not. And that document's also, like, that's not all the rules. The rules are modified by the laws that are applicable to either you or to the people that the company, like the jurisdiction in which they're based. So it's really hard to get an idea of, like, what are the actual rules that I'm playing on, and you really don't have, like, it's very one-sided. So, like, if you want to use the app which you do want to do, like you have to pretty much accept at face value this really long legal document and this whole set of like laws that you may not even be familiar with. And I think that's problematic because the way we enforce that is through the legal system, which is very costly. And just raise your hand if you've ever like sued somebody, like a provider that like you've agreed to their terms of service and they've violated it, or like have you ever like taken legal action against them? Anybody? Yeah? Okay. Anybody want to share? I'd love to hear.
Okay. When I was young, my brother and I, we built this commercial fishing boat for this guy from Alaska. We were in Houston, Texas, in America at that time, and we agreed that he was going to pay for the engine, the transmission, the propeller system, the drive system, and everything. And then when we ordered it and it got there, he didn't want to pay for it after it got delivered. Yeah. So it was a long story, but we ended up having to sue him, and because we didn't want to be responsible for paying his engine, transmission, and propeller system.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. But like in the context of, have you ever like used an app on the internet and like?
Oh, you're talking about an app?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Like I mean, in the case of a business relationship, or like where like it's like two parties that have negotiated a set of terms that people often go and enforce it. But if you're a consumer rolling up to like Facebook.
I mean, I recently had some software engineers I hired to build an app for me, and then we agreed to something, and then after they built it, they ran off with it.
Yeah. Again,
so.
Yeah, so class action suits, yeah.
So class action suits, like for example, I think there was one against Amazon for Kindle, and I saw my account credited, but other than that, I have...
Yeah, that's a great example. So that's like, so I think that's probably
Timbo.
The one way most people have ever had terms of services enforced or laws enforced in a way that helps them. Go ahead.
We're on the other side of the equation. We're the ones where you tick the box and you agree, and probably not as much as it used to be, and never with any cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, but we sell online ticketing for airlines and hotels. And so we have people who tick the box but don't read the terms and conditions that says, basically we are honest and you have to prove that you're not. And basically people don't read. And today with Amazon, they want the one click. I've shopped, buy. Somewhere in there, there's the tick the box of, oh yes, I have read the 35 pages and I do understand that I can't change my mind on a flight that is prepaid and it is non-refundable. And so they come back to us. We're on the other side of the equation. So look, it's there for a reason, and it's to protect the merchant and to protect the consumer, and there's a fine balance there. So we love crypto because it's very clear that when the transaction's done, it's finished. And from there, then it goes on. So I'm not sure what answer you're looking for, but that's our side. Yeah. We use it every single day. Touch wood, we've never lost a case, ever.
Cool. One more.
The reason why Amazon did credit our accounts is they didn't account for a particular a condition, basically. Mm-hmm. So within the terms of service, they didn't have that, so they lost basically, and they paid out. So you can't always have a contract that accommodates for every individual use case, and we see that more and more when the company does lose in these cases.
Okay. Yeah. So I think it's useful to like divide between like business terms of like business logic, like this is the widget we're trading versus like this is the data we're collecting about you and who we're going to share it with. We've seen a really big growth of these like since GDPR in Europe. So a lot of companies that have any customers in Europe, they put these really long documents that say like these are our data processors, and these are like the list of, I think PayPal had a list of like 150 different companies they share your information with. Yeah, so it's rare and it's hard to enforce. I actually think that software can eat a lot of this, and we can sort of like build a world where it's like software, like your user agent, your browser is defending your rights, not necessarily about like business transactions, but at least like the information that's being collected on your behalf. And so I call that can't be evil terms of service. And the way we look at that is similar. We start with the user intent and we try to figure out what do they want. And so when you enter like a URL into your browser, an address, or you like download an app, like I think it's pretty safe to assume that like you want to interact with like that app. Like, so I take that as like the user intent. Like if you type in like abc.com, that's where you want to go and you want to interact with those people. You don't want to like you interacting with that app doesn't say anything about like sending data to like a font server of some other company or like to a regulator or so any other parties. Like the user has indicated they want to interact with one specific app. And then we try to enforce that. And we can do that by taking this current web that we have and sort of like replacing parts of it that have trusted third parties in them. And so those of you that aren't familiar in Blockstack, we created a name system that's currently based on top of Bitcoin, and a number of other like a storage system that users own, and other things. So I'm proposing that we take that and then we add a new security model to the web, and then sort of create a new world. So this is sort of the stuff that Blockstack provides, that replaces a lot of those trusted things. And yeah, okay. And so the way we get the new security model, though, is with something I call the Can't Be Evil sandbox. And the way I think about the Can't Be Evil sandbox is like taking the current web security model, which is one of, and thinking, hey, if we were building the web today, like what would we do? Would we do the same things? And the current web is based on this idea of like a blacklist. So everything is allowed by default. And if you don't like it, you can install an ad blocker or you can install a tracking blocker and you can try to block it. And I think that's really kind of insane. If we were building the web today, we wouldn't do that, because those are better computer science practices. Like there's this idea of the principle of least privilege. Like an app should have only the amount of like permissions that it needs to. You shouldn't like give it permission to do anything. And we see like a sort of an analogy to this back in the Windows 95 days. Operating systems were built so that when you installed some software, it could do whatever it wants to your entire computer. It could erase it. It could like change it to boot something else. That was a disaster. Everybody had viruses for about like 10 years. And then operating systems like basically got rebuilt so that now when you run an app, it only can access its own little sandbox. And so I think the web is sort of at the same place. You load a web page. You can make a web page that theoretically downloads the entire internet on one page load. You just put links to every other resource on the internet. And that seems to be kind of crazy. So I think if we switch that around so that by default, when you load a web app, it doesn't have access to anything else, like can't make network requests. And then like we slowly give it permissions based on what it needs to do, that we can sort of like create a new world of apps that behave more like users would want. So I created something called the Can't Be Evil sandbox. It's like some technology. So for those of you who don't know, I'm actually working on building a new browser, but I'm sort of testing out technology right in some of these theories. So what the Can't Be Evil sandbox does is it gets rid of some of the low-hanging fruit of problems of the web. So it bans cookies. Cookies are problematic on the web because they're something that gets sent every time your browser makes a request, whether or not the developer wants them to even be sent. They were made for back in the days before JavaScript, where you needed to track logged in people across. So there are like much better solutions than cookies these days, like for app developers that give them more control over like when user data is leaving the web browser. So we suggest people use those like local storage. And what it also does is it prevents the use of third-party assets. So there's a behavior among a lot of web developers of like linking code from other people's servers. A lot of this behavior was pushed on people by Google. They said, hey, let's provide this CDN, and we can put like libraries that people use in the CDN, and then developers can just link this into their website. It can save them like 5 minutes of copying a file, and we can tell them that it's going to be faster. We can tell them that maybe like their users will have a faster experience, and then like by the way, as a side effect, we can track all of the activity of everybody around the web, but we're not going to tell them about that. So we prohibit that behavior as well too, and to encourage people to put their assets in the app that they're actually creating. Question? That's not what CDNs do. That's something like caching. CDNs are multiple edge locations. Okay, well, that's actually the misinformation that Google told you. So they said like, oh, well, if you load jQuery from our CDN, then your user is not going to have to load it again. But in reality, like app developers all use different versions of libraries. So the chance that your customer has already downloaded that particular version, especially since they're released like weekly, is like pretty low. And also like they make a request. They make a head request to check if the asset has changed. So like a lot of the stuff, like when things are cached, like the browser will often check to see if like the E tag has changed, and send a request to servers. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, and you can get the benefits of CDNs, which are caching assets on your own network close to users by running it through your own app origin. You don't need to link it off of someone else's. Lots of providers do that these days. But in version 1 of this sandbox, we don't really want to force people to like have to rewrite their entire web apps. We're just looking to like get rid of low-hanging fruit, so you can still make programmatic connections. And I've sort of put this out as a developer preview of something called the New Internet Extension, which is available on GitHub, and people can try it out. And the way we're looking at the way the app developers can opt into this sandbox are by using setting an HTTP header called can't be evil and setting it to true. And if your user is using this extension and has opted into the sandbox will enforce these rules on behalf of the user. And if they haven't opted in, the extension will just track your behavior and report that back to the user as well. This is sort of like what it looks like when when an app has opted into the extension. It's preventing evil and also reporting evil. It says this app hasn't used any cookies or third-party assets. This is an example of an evil app. It says that it tells the user how many requests have been made, what types of assets have been loaded. And we're working with Blockstack app miners. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Blockstack has a program called app mining. It's named after Bitcoin miners. And the idea is that like Bitcoin miners get rewarded for like securing the Bitcoin network. App miners get rewarded for helping to build out a network and ecosystem of apps. And so these different sort of criteria that our Can't Be Evil extension like rates on are included in the ranking of apps, and it helps determine how apps are funded. This is something we're going to ship later, probably next year in our browser. And so we think that like if you take some of the technology that's come out of Bitcoin and also change the security model of the existing web, that you can build a new web that behaves a lot more closely to what users actually expect and want. And really excited about that. I think it's going to really open up sort of like, in particular to like Bitcoin and crypto. One of the reasons we started heading this way is because we saw a lot of problems with adoption of some types of web wallets where people with a lot of Bitcoin weren't comfortable with putting value in a wallet that was rendered in a web browser. And that was because they couldn't be sure that their private key wasn't being sent somewhere else. So a lot of it, like what we're thinking about is how can we build a separate web environment where you get the benefits of ease of distribution of software, sort of a general proof of purpose computing environment that's permissionless, but do it in a way where users can have like some sort of trust of like, well, if I put some information like my crypto, my Bitcoin into this app, I can be sure that it's not going to be stolen and sent somewhere else. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go to newinternetextension.com. I'll send you an email when it's available in the Chrome and the Firefox stores. And thanks so much for your time. I'd love to take any questions. The question. Oh, yeah.
What browsers are is the extension available for?
It's currently available for. I've applied for the Chrome and Firefox stores. It hasn't been like shipped in it yet, but it's approved. It's just not turned on. I think it also works on Brave as well.
No more questions? Okay, that helps us at least catching up a bit with the schedule. Thanks a lot, Larry, for this talk. Yeah, I mean, if you have any more questions later, he's also around the whole day. We have the lunch break coming up soon after the next talk, and yeah, otherwise the after party tonight. Our next speaker going to be Jon Myers, one of our local residents here, has been one of the pioneers also of like the digital nomad movement, bringing a lot of people down to Saigon. Also involved in Bitcoin, cryptocurrency stuff now since at least 2013 or something. Yeah, so also since about a year now, I think, like chief design officer at Liquid Exchange. Is not related to. Wow, time flies. Not related to the Liquid sidechain by Blockstream, so there's sometimes a bit confusion. Former like Quoine Exchange, I never can pronounce this right. Yeah, because they also have like a large team down here in Saigon. He will tell you a bit about, one of the pain points which we still have in the space, how to create applications with better user interface, better user design, because if you want to get more mass adoption in the space, just like command line tools don't really cut it if you want to get to more mainstream users. Okay, seems we're working on some technical issues right now. Yeah, should be up in like 1-2 minutes.
That's right. We'll keep rolling here. So, Dominik, thanks for the introduction, and thanks for everybody for coming out. So I'm Jon Myers. I am the Chief Design Officer of Liquid.com. Been there about 2 years now. Head up all product innovation. We run a design team there. And what I wanted to talk to you all about is, how we develop product. I'm a very product-focused person and very focused on usability, utility, those sorts of things. And so I'll walk you through some of the stuff we're doing. We're kind of in a hurry, so I'm going to run through my presentation a little fast. But anyhow, I'll jump in. So how I got into crypto. So 2012, 2013, I was working with Nikos Benentes and Andreas on something called Coin Simple. So we were trying to solve payments online for Bitcoin back then. And so we launched in September 2014. And we were just very early, and we didn't get much traction, but we did about 5 million transactions in all, and it was shut down, I guess, around 2017. So that was my first foray into that. I've worked a lot with other fintech projects here in Saigon. I helped launch Timo, which is a bank, online bank. Been involved in a lot of other ICOs and so on. Self-Key helped design that wallet. And so here I am now. So first, I think to really understand design, you need a good working definition of what design is. And so the working definition is not just how it looks, but how it works. And so especially in crypto, those are things I think a lot about, when we're designing new products for the exchange, when we're prototyping things and so on. I'm really focused on how it works. And designer, that's an interesting term, right? So there's a lot of different types of designers. So there's UX designer, UI designer, interaction designer. There's researchers, there's analysts, strategists, and so on. We tend to practice holistic design. So it's kind of an all-in-one term now. So you have product designer. So a lot of those other types of disciplines get funneled into that, especially as a startup. You need to have cross or interdisciplinary folks on your team who can kind of feed into that holistic approach, which is a product designer. Designing for crypto. So when we're designing for crypto, we think a lot about putting usability first. And so usability, So usability is the ease with which a tool can be learned and used. And so that's usually informed by three things. So data, intuition, and observation. So those three things kind of, we're looking at that a lot to figure out how to better serve customers on the exchange, how to better serve API traders, interface traders, and so on. And so that means designing for context and understanding context. So we think a lot about that as well. So designing, what is the user thinking, doing at that particular moment in time? And we think a lot about system impact. So design systems, feature, and user impact. So one of the things that we've been doing is creating our own design systems for web and mobile. And those have to be talking to each other as well. So a design system, you can think about it as little building blocks that feed into the overall application. So all the text, all the form fields, all the spacing, all the colors, all those things align to form these sort of elements that form the design system. And then those go into building features and products. So we look a lot at systemic impact for that. So to bring all this together, you need processes and systems. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the custom processes and systems that we've done to bring this all together. So we call this one Flow. So it's a liquid design system, and it's really based on this initial manifesto. So we think a lot about context, how intuitive is the application, how organized is the application. We think a lot about taking ownership on the team too. So every person on the team should really be taking ownership and interest in the outcomes. Trust factor of the interface, processing time, one-way doors, and actual aesthetic would come last. And so this is some of the framework that we use. So anybody familiar with Confluence and Jira? So they're kind of a nightmare, but a necessary nightmare, and probably it's the worst case scenario or the best case scenario for developing software. So we use Confluence and Jira. And for the design team, I think it's really important for designers and product designers to be involved in the development flow. So a lot of times I've seen other organizations where they kind of silo design and it kind of gets away from engineering. And so with our process here, it's actually integrated into the development process. So in Jira, we have custom issue types that we've developed. So we look at analytics, research, spec, story. Is it an epic or a task? And so those are designed to move through a custom workflow. So our custom workflow here, so something goes into the backlog first. It enters an exploration stage, and then it goes into active research. So at that particular point in time, design team, designers, other stakeholders such as product managers, we're wireframing. We're going a little bit into higher fidelity design, but not full on. Then it moves down the chain. So once something goes into the dojo, it's ready for battle. And so other people come in. So that would be a higher fidelity prototype at that point. And we're going in and we're trying to refine it. So at that point in time, within the workflow, it either goes back into active research where we'll actually talk to real customers, look at data, and so on. If it makes it out of the dojo, then it goes into content review. And so at that point in content review, we want to do everything pixel perfect, real data down to the exact spec and make it pixel perfect as well. Then it goes into design handoff. And so at that point in time, the job really doesn't stop with the designer, right? So this is all collated together into larger product epics, right? So then all this workflow, we're constantly reviewing everything as it goes through the pipeline. And sometimes it may go back into research and then have to be reprototyped or it moves on. But those are some of the key points within the workflow. And this presentation is going to die here, actually. So I'm going to move on here fast. So some of the other key points died, but I'm happy to take your questions. Sure.
Sorry for everybody when I'm grabbing all these questions. I mentioned earlier about the Amazon One Touch phenomenon where particularly American shoppers basically shut down when they're buying if it becomes too complicated, and too complicated for them is more than one touch. So they've been conditioned to buy on Amazon. I find what I want, I touch the button, it's done. So as you bring that into your design and your processes that you're working on, how do you see that playing out for the world of crypto, and particularly how can merchants or entities meet all the requirements of KYC, of security, of the consumer and the merchant, and still have one touch?
I don't know. I mean, it just depends on the jurisdiction, right? So for KYC, for example, you're going to, in some jurisdictions, you're going to absolutely have to have a liveness test.
Yeah.
Right. So like there's certain things about it that are unavoidable inconveniences unless we change the paradigm upon which that exists totally. Right. Which is quite tough.
Yeah,
so,
that's it. For example, in the United States, they've just come out with a study like 61% of the consumers will shut down, will abandon the shopping cart if they actually have to put in a PIN number or any other added information to secure like a 3D secure transaction.
Yeah, understood. I mean, one of the things that we do on our exchange is that for crypto to crypto trading and withdrawals, there's just a basic account, right? So you don't need to KYC, right? But if anytime you touch fiat, you're gonna have to KYC. So we're looking at ways to activate and reduce friction that way, which are still within compliance, but it's just gonna depend.
I was just mentioning there was an article, a newsletter posted by Hacker Noon this morning about how centralized exchanges are being attacked or hacked, and users are being exposed because they're leaving their coins on exchanges. How quickly do you think can exchanges like iterate and evolve onto a better system in which they protect users, like as they engage with exchanges? Like, what's the next step, and when do you think it will happen?
Probably not keeping user funds in hot wallets would be one. So like the one yesterday. So for example, we invested a lot of money in an MPC solution. So we still do cold storage, but we have an MPC solution that allows for faster withdrawals. And so, our withdrawals are faster like that. But I think it's just better auditing, better infrastructure to support that type of thing, to protect user funds. But a lot of it amazes me that funds are still on a hot wallet anywhere like that, especially $50 million, like yesterday or day before. So, yeah. Cool. Any more questions? Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So a lot of the stuff in the space can be addressed by improving the design, but at the same time, I believe some other stuff, maybe something like key management, fundamentally maybe not be able to solve by design. What are the things you think we can still improve on by delivering better UX, but others that you kind of believe that these need to change at protocol level or it cannot be solved?
Like, for example, name service stuff.
Okay.
That would be really interesting. There are some approaches to key management that we're looking at right now for self-custody that don't require the traditional approach. But yeah, I mean, I think key management, name service, that kind of stuff would be interesting. I also think in terms of decimalization and just denomination, making more human-friendly numbers and figures would help for mass adoption. Sure.
You guys are based in Japan. You have a lot of Japanese users. Is there, from a kind of a user persona perspective, is there a big difference between the Japanese market and the rest of the world?
Massive.
Tell us more.
What's interesting, like in Japan, I do a focus group every time I go to Japan and sit down and talk with Japanese customers. I think in general, it stems from the retail FX market. So Japan has the largest retail FX market in the world. So in terms of how people trade much more sophisticated, much different trading strategies, very, very technical. They like a high level of data density that other markets wouldn't like. Mostly like white themed, which is really strange. So like all the themes I see in the trading themes are like all bright white, which is pretty interesting. They like to, it's also like there's a lot of activity like on crypto Twitter in Japan and stuff like that. That's very unique is in my observation. There's also a lot of like behaviors that we've noticed. So for example, people love to share their charts and their like their P&L and that kind of thing, and they'll draw cats on it or whatever and share it out there. But there's some interesting phenomena with retail traders, I think, in Japan that are a little unique for sure.
What about demographics, like the median age, is it younger?
I think in terms of like high volume traders, API traders, those tend to be like crypto hedge funds and stuff like that. In Japan, I'd say the average median age is probably around like 32 to 35. And it's somebody that got into crypto through gaming. That's been my observation in different focus groups and stuff like that. But then there's another end of the spectrum where a lot of senior citizens are getting into crypto. Yeah, so we actually were, it's pretty interesting. So they're actually having other people buy it on their behalf. But that's something that we picked up on as well. Sure.
At what point do you ever decide, okay, it's probably better to redesign everything from scratch rather than just implementing gradual changes? Like what drives that kind of, complete redesign?
Yeah. Understood. So the designers, every designer is going to want to go in and redo it from scratch. I guarantee you, every single one. But the business side, and the strategic side, I don't think it necessarily makes sense most of the time. Like most of the time when I've seen projects try to go for a radical redesign or a radical re-engineering of their application, it usually fails. That's based on personal experience, but I think it's really hard to rewrite things totally from scratch. In the case of an exchange where we have all this proprietary matching engines, which are part of our secret sauce and things like that, and then even on the front end and all the dependencies that exist there, I had to come in and put on a lot of lipstick initially. And so we're starting to pull those pieces out and have a better, more coherent design system. But it's taken me almost 2 years to get there, and we're still not, we're about 60% there for where I want to be.
Is it more driven and based on the back-end engineering side, or is it driven by the user demand? Like users are either sick of this or they want to see brand new design?
I think like in terms of like evaluating user impact, I mean, there's things that obviously you want a really holistic user experience and things to be connected. But if you're an established exchange like us, for example, like the stuff that I inherited there, I just wanted to come in and just cut it all out, but it was quite impractical, right? Because everything emanates from the API, and the front end has a lot of dependencies on that. So it'd be quite hard, actually.
It's like taking a nut out of an airplane and see what happens.
Yeah, and but I think in most cases, if it's an it depends on the stage of the business as well. Sometimes, like I've seen other startups where maybe it does make sense just to scrap it. Like actually, come to think of it now, I was involved in a totally separate project, and they just had a garbage code base and a crappy front end, and it was just scrapped. It was an app here in town. I don't want to say who, but yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So you're an exchange located in Japan?
Our corporate office is in Japan. We have an office at Saigon Center. We've got about 100 staff there. So a lot of like our design team is here in Saigon, so I'm running that. lot of engineers here in Saigon, customer support.
Okay, so you can link a bank account in Saigon to your exchange.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Sure. Any other questions? Sure.
So, okay. What does your exchange specialize in? This has been trading a while. I've heard of it before, but until today I didn't realize it was the liquid side chain versus the liquid exchange.
Yeah.
So,
main trading volume is BTC JPY.
Okay.
That accounts for probably about 85 to 90% of volume. But we have BTC USD, mainly spot. We have spot margin. In Japan, we deleverage to 5x. Globally, we have 25x.
So do you guys accept Vietnamese customers, U.S. customers, or?
No U.S. customers, but Vietnamese customers, yeah.
And you accept in USD, Vietnamese dong?
Not VND, but USD.
Okay.
Yeah, about 15 different fiat currencies, but we currently don't have VND.
How about Thai baht?
No, I don't think so. Not now.
Okay. And you said that your most liquid pairs are BTC?
BTC JPY.
Okay.
BTC USD.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So. We accept corporate U.S. customers who have a foreign entity. So we have different crypto hedge funds that are incorporated in Hong Kong and so on, like that. But and then we have also have CFD up to 100x leverage, and we're rolling out perpetuals next month.
You don't think that's a little bit dangerous?
What's it, 100x?
Yeah.
It can be.
Because I've never seen somebody use 100x and be consistently profitable.
Yeah.
So.
That is true. That is true.
I mean, no, but I'm asking like
if
I was setting up an exchange, I'm not technical enough to do that,
Yeah.
but if I was, I would not allow something like that because no one's ever been able to do that successfully over a long period of time. So
yeah,
what was the thinking behind allowing something that that?
I mean, to be honest, I don't think we don't have that much 100x out there, but it's just also a nature of competition as well. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's good for business? No, it's not. I mean, this is how you lose customers quick. I mean.
Yeah, exactly. So. All right.
Okay, no more questions. Everybody hungry now because
all right,
we start to have the lunch served.
Food time.
Thank you very much, Jon, for joining in and giving us his insights into how design a bit more beautiful products in the space. I think that's still an area where a lot of improvement can be done. Otherwise, I don't want to keep you back. The lunch is served over there in the room, and hope that you enjoy your meal. And we will be back starting here, I think, at 1:15 roughly.